So let's get started. This is the L2 Interop working group call. Agenda is in the chat, or it will be in 1 second. Here we go. 1 second. And it is also in the Ethereum PM repo for anyone who wants to follow along there. Cool. So we have a packed agenda today with lots of great stuff. So going to try to keep us on time. If any section starts to run over too much, I might jump in and ask if we can either continue async or on the next call. Cool. So starting things off with a quick overview of where things are today. Just for anyone who's maybe trying to catch up to where things are in the Interop working group. I know we have lots of Telegram messages. It's hard to keep up. I'm going to try to work on that as well, provide some summaries so folks don't have to read every single message. But as a quick high-level overview, we have three main tracks underway at the moment. This is number one, chain-specific addresses, number two, message passing, and three, intents. On the topic of intents, last week we did a public announcement for the Open Intents framework. Thanks everyone in this group for being a part of it. Still early days for the framework. Really, the goal is for everyone here in this group to shape it, to help it be maximally effective. We'll get a bit more into it as part of our first agenda item on today's call. And then lastly, just a quick thing I wanted to share as a teaser. We will soon start working on an experimental wallet to demonstrate all of the interop work that's been underway. This will just be a prototype, proof of concept purposes. Current plan is to fork an existing wallet, but still a lot to sort through as we get into this. Just wanted to share as a quick teaser for everybody. And again, the sort of high level idea is to show what Interop actually feels like in your hands in a wallet. We'll share more in the coming weeks. And yeah, ping me if you'd like to get involved. Okay, cool. So yeah, jumping into the agenda. First up, review of the Open Intents framework. And I guess before jumping in, just wanted to quickly provide some high-level framing. To be clear, this framework is not meant to be a finished product today. The goal is, again, for us to continue iterating and improving on it over the coming weeks and months to deliver something that is maximally useful for all parties across Ethereum. Anyone that wants to get intents should have an easy way to get intents. Three main components of the framework: open source solver implementation, number one. Number two, we have a modular suite of smart contracts that define the logic for executing and settling intents. And number three, the customizable UI template to make all of this more accessible to end users. So yeah, I guess I want to open this up for discussion. There has been some discussion in the chat around like what this framework is or isn't, and I think maybe just some general uncertainty around how things like resource locks may or may not fit in. Which, yeah, maybe that's just on us for not doing enough to sort of explain this well when it was first launched. So I want to take a few minutes here on the call, go through any questions or feedback. Um, yeah, and maybe just starting off, if anyone has thoughts on things they definitely want to see be a part of this framework or unsure if it's already a part of it today. I know some of the LeFi team has been providing feedback. So yeah, anyone that wants to jump in first, please feel free to do so.
I can start. Uh, so I, Alexander, I work at LeFi under the Catalyst intent system. One of the big things that I see as an issue with the current way that the framework is posed, especially on the reference implementation in general, is that the reference implementation does not differentiate between what is required for an intent system to implement to be part of the framework or be built within it, and what is optional and not required for building an intent system that is compatible with the framework and easily integratable into their relayer. As a result, it's hard to provide feedback and design a proper system around it, since a lot of these are either, oh, that is not part of the standard, or, well, we can change that later. And for me, it will be very helpful if what we're actually designing to building a framework for and with is defined, and then the reference implementation is an aid in understanding how are these concepts that we've defined, that we say building an intent system within this framework, what does it need to have, and this is how you implement it in our opinionated way. So you have two different kind of reference documented and an unopinionated one, which is more of a standard, not a full standard because it's still somewhat opinionated. And then you have the very opinionated reference implementation, which, just to do references on the reference implementation here, it has like high level of data availability within the contract. It has maybe some schematics for how you integrate it, but those are the reference implementation and not necessarily how the framework for building an intent system should be in general.
Got it. Thanks, Alexander. Anyone else have comments? Anyone want to respond to Alexander's feedback?
I have a question. Since it's the first time we are joining this group here. Now we just got this comment from Alex. And my question would be, who's leading this effort? I saw that Hyperlane has essentially pushed the OIF. Who's in charge to make these changes? Who makes decisions? Like, this is a pretty large group here. Is there a process on how things are supposed to be? Is it just pull request based and we take it from there? Or yeah, I think maybe also starting with what's the goal? For whom are we building this framework? What's the idea behind that framework? Who's supposed to implement it? Also because like there's an UI component and so on. So I feel like it's a lot, and then at the same time not flexible enough. So I'm just curious, a bit lost on that.
Sure, yeah. So there's been a small team working on this for a while now. Hyperlane and others have done a great job at getting us to where we are today. This is a collaboration between many people now going forward, I think, in terms of who can contribute and how are we going to get to our ultimate goal. I think it's, like you've said, just it's an open repo that anybody can start contributing to. And yeah, I think it's something that we're going to continue to figure out sort of in real time, the best way to do it. So maybe not the sort of best answer, but we're kind of figuring this out live, I think, in real time.
And for whom are we building this? That was also a question Alexander had. For whom is this framework? Is it for dApps to have a bridge page, or what's the idea?
Yeah, so the starting off, and if Nam from Wonderland or anyone else wants to jump in, I think starting off, it's really about making this as modular and unopinionated as possible so that it can get into the hands of many end users. Oh, there we go. It looks like we got the Denver crew here now plugged in. So maybe we can have them jump here in a second if they're able to. But yes, so I think starting off, for example, with this should be something that L2s can adopt. It should be something that really anyone who wants to get intense can get intense through this sort of modular, unopinionated framework. I do think sort of maybe what you're alluding to is that we need to perhaps be a bit opinionated about where we're starting off and which users are we starting with. So yeah, actually, Skelly, maybe I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Felipe, as you said, like, yeah, this is mainly the first step or an initial effort into having, say, some specs being translated into code. I think the current team did like an awesome job on basically setting up all the kind of the raw structure for us to start experimenting, and also for having teams. I don't know, see in code what we are talking about. There are still a lot of things that need to be fixed. Let's say standard wise, there are a lot of things that we don't really have a way of knowing. Yeah, sorry for the cat. uh, uh, that we still have no clue, and that we need to figure out. One of the key things that we need to I'm so sorry. One of the key things that we need to figure out are related to cross-chain addresses and related to a lot of the user stories, which I think um, having the team in person kind of tackling this will be a lot of help with. But mainly, if you have any concerns or any ideas or any improvements, I would rather have you guys either use the standard repo, the Interop repo, or use the Open Intents repo, open up a PR, open up an issue there. Just because sometimes the concerns kind of get lost on the chats. Yeah, Kat is pretty happy about this, or pretty angry. But besides that, I mean, just take this as a first step. This is not supposed to be kind of a reference implementation for the future, but it's mostly a starting point for us, similar to what we're doing with all the documents and specs on the current Interop repository. It's a call for action, a call for collaboration.
Cool, thanks. We have a few hands up. You want to start with Hart?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, my take on this, guys, is like, okay, intents are pretty useful. People like this intent-based bridging, get this fast transfer to new chains, do actions. We have a standard for it, the 7683 standard, which I think is like been fairly well received. And people want intents everywhere, kind of like the tagline Josh has been pushing. Philip, I look at the push here. You know, like in LeFi, like when you're talking with us at a cross, you want a cross to get to a new chain quickly. And so if we can have a framework that makes it easier to bring intents everywhere, that's like a net good thing for Ethereum interoperability, where we can just bridge intents or get intents to every corner of the Ethereum ecosystem. So I look at this as a really freaking cool opportunity for us to standardize around a general framework and have a bunch of settlement systems, different architectures that let us get to different chains, maybe with some different security properties. It's great. And we can have a common solver network. The entire push behind 7683 was to take across this solver network and transform it into a public good that anyone could access. And so to me, this open intents is just like a nice next logical step or extension of 7683, which helps us get this intent framework into more places more quickly, and an early days effort. So that's my take.
Ellie and Nam and crew in Denver.
Hey everybody, can you guys hear us? Yes,
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, just to I think give some context, Philip. I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, it was like, who was this for? Like, why was this created? Maybe to give some context, originally when we started this about like 3-4 months ago, it was basically based on conversations where like we're talking a lot of chains, a lot of dApps, wallets, like when everybody kind of wanted intents, and there was like somewhat limited ways of getting it, right? So we actually were talking a lot of teams who were building their own intent protocol and product experiences, and we saw like 4 or 5 working with us, building on top of Pipeline in particular example, but we felt like, wow, this seems very inefficient. Like, what if there was a way to like share kind of like common abstractions and tooling that allowed these different teams to kind of like work together to still serve themselves, right, with an intent experience, but not have to reinvent the whole wheel from scratch. And so that's kind of like where it started, right? And that's where I think you see some of the like kind of abstractions, like, oh, hey, a reference solver that can solve for different intent protocols. Oh, hey, right, like contracts that can like be settled through different mechanisms. And so that was just, I think, where it started. Like, definitely the intent is not to like say like, hey, this will solve everything, or like there's like a particular like grand vision behind like what it could look like. That's definitely is a very, I hope so, that like as part of this broader effort, we can all collectively come together and kind of decide, hey, what do we want it to look like? But it was really just like, I saw a bunch of people doing a bunch of similar work, and I was like, hey, it's easier if we don't kind of like duplicate efforts. And that was kind of, I think, the main context. Whether that's right, like, yeah, 7683 or other the intent framework already supports resource blocks, already supports like non-7683 protocols. Like, I don't think it's like opinionated about pretty much anything, to be honest. It's just like meant as like a shared tool chain for people who build in this space to get intents everywhere.
Philippe?
Yeah. Maybe just to, because I don't want to push back too hard on any of this. Essentially, I want to differentiate between 3 things. The first thing is intents everywhere. Yes, I agree, or we agree, right? Like, totally behind it. It is the best user experience. It's the chain abstract experience. The user shouldn't care. Essentially, LeFi has been all around all about chain abstraction like for 3 years, right? It was all about getting in and out of any asset within one transaction. That's what we've been working on. So Intents like plays right up our alley. Perfect. The next topic out of these three is 7683. Again, should we standardize it? Yes, absolutely. We need a standard for that. So we 100% support the movement. There's nothing against that. However, when we as a community decide to push a standard and market it, we should be careful and see what's out there. So before we raise a standard, we should look left and right what is there. There has been Vaibhav Shelani from Socket, also at DEF CON, raising concerns around it. Uniswap itself came up with the compact, which is like a resource lock based. Catalyst has been talking about resource locks. Others have been too, right? So 7683 as an interface, great. From my perspective, it is too early to promote a specific implementation. It becomes even worse if we then build the OIF, which is the third topic I'm touching base on, the open intent framework that builds on an immature standard. And so 7683 as an interface is mature enough. As an implementation, it is not mature enough. To then push an open intent standard, and we essentially start pushing something out with tech debt from day one, is not a good idea from my perspective. And this is where I wished we wouldn't have rushed all of this, right? And have a clear discussion. What is the intent? What is the interface? How should an implementation look like? And then if we want to push for an implementation, we should really just keep it as small as possible and not with UI and whatsoever, because like all of that at the end of the day then gives a wrong impression. I can tell you, so Levi's been building a widget. Like it's very modern. It uses like most modern lightweight standards out there to build a front end SDK and widget. And I know how much time it takes to maintain this, to build this, and as the space is fragmenting and there are more and more assets and multi-chain asset standards and so on, like actually being able to provide, like to make sure that this is actually a go-to solution that's sustainable, that's a company by itself. And I think we should get a little bit back to the drawing board and yeah, differentiate between what is interface, what is implementation, and what do we actually want to push, and again, for whom. If you say any L2 wants to adopt this, what does it mean any L2 wants to adopt this? Does it mean they have a widget they can put on their native bridging interface? Is that the problem we want to solve? Is that reasonable? Because then suddenly we have that specific use case and target group, and then others might get lost and might not use that open intent framework. So the moment we do too much, we are narrowing down the target group and we are narrowing down the use case. And that's why I think that OIF might be a little bit too overblown and a little bit too early to promote that strongly.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think any of us would disagree with what you're saying, but I do want to maybe, before we go over to Christian, Hart or Nam, do you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, I think I appreciate your feedback. I think I definitely don't want to like oversell the OIF, and like maybe the fact that like everybody came together to promote it makes you feel like, oh man, like this is like last call, and like if I don't do something right now, then like, well, like the train is running and like disaster is happening on the other end. Like I really just viewed I like the reason why we started working on this was really just like, hey, people are working on stuff, and it seems like if they're working on stuff together, it seems better. Like that's literally it. Like I'm not trying to like say like, oh, this is like the best implementation. Like this is like, right, like everybody should switch to this. Like definitely not saying that whatsoever. It was just like, yeah, like people, right? Like everybody, like not everybody, a lot of people in this room, right, have been working on these kind of like things, right? And like just as an engineer, maybe I'm too engineer minded here, just I see like everybody basically doing very similar things. And it's, oh man, it would be so awesome if we work together on this. So just think of this more as a forum for people to like talk to each other, right? Like already we have on the repos, right? To basically like have shared tooling and abstraction. Don't view this as like, definitely don't view this as like, oh, the OIF is going to solve interop. It's going to solve intents. Like this is how everybody gets intents. Definitely not. Like totally agree that that would be bad, but I don't think that's what it's intended.
Cool, thanks. Let's go to Christian.
Yeah, sorry, Josh, I won't. Yeah, go.
Okay, just real quick, I want to, agree with what was just said on a slightly different topic, just in terms of like this announcement going out and how we're sort of like explaining the user value. I think the announcement doesn't really explain the value to users. And I think that there's a couple things we have to look out for. One is like when we talk about intents in general, there might be a lot of confusion because there's a lot of different usages of the word intents in different contexts. And a lot of the popular usage right now might be related to AI agents and how they use intents within like categorization. And so, we may need to clarify when we talk about intents publicly that we're talking about like the intent to move assets across chains and maybe illustrate that better. I think also we have to be mindful, and we see this a lot with like the support requests that we handle at MetaMask, that like for a lot of users, the different Ethereum L2s are just like different chains, and they don't understand like the opportunity to build really cool interoperability use cases, specifically among, layer 2 networks within Ethereum, and how that's different from like, I don't know, I could go to like layer 0 or Thorchain, like, and do like cross-chain swaps, right? And that's like a completely different mechanism, right? And that has nothing to do with like Metropolitan Ethereum and the type of interoperability that we can build within the Ethereum ecosystem. And I know like, so the main sort of like open intents framework announcement kind of has a little bit of just like, we are building a thing to solve a problem that is not really obvious to users. And maybe the thread, it makes a lot of sense to developers, and I totally agree for developers. The message is like, we want to standardize something that will make it easier for us to align on like an interface for doing these things. There's also a thread from Stacy that Ethereum account retweeted, and it's a pretty good like explainer, and it's really good to see that. The one user value that she mentions is like you get fast bridging, but I don't think that's actually the main user value, because I think like you could have different interfaces, and whoever does implementations will get that with different interfaces. I think the real user value is like over time, different wallets and dApps will be able to adopt a lot more routes for doing these types of bridging actions, because there'll be a standard interface to do it. And I want to call out like when the W3 was pushing standards and sort of like socializing standards, like web standards in the early 2000s, the really common thing that I think was effective at clicking with people was like, if the different browser apps align around different standards, it's more likely that all these different websites and the different things that they're doing are going to work on your browser, right? And as long as everybody's aligning on similar standards, you're going to get less of what we were seeing in the late 90s, which was like on one browser, it's like, oh, you don't have this version of Flash, so you just can't load this website, right? And you're like, the browser of choice that you use is not compatible with every website. And I think that that's the ultimate user value that we need to be driving. It's like, all of these different apps that interact with these different Ethereum chains will be like able to more effectively, do these types of actions and have like standard interfaces for these actions.
Sorry, Greg, do you mind if I say something immediately to it, just real quick? Christian, it's great that you referenced that, because I very clearly remember that phase of Web 2.0, and exactly that is what I was missing. I was missing the RFC phase. I was missing the request for comment phase for this. This is why it feels rushed, right? Like all of that could have gone down like a little bit better by actually having that request for comment phase for that standard.
Yeah.
I think this is where I want to like make a point about standards in general, and I think this is where this interface like came out, and it's like probably more valuable than negative. I'm not sure how many people here have actually like really tried to push a lot of like standards, especially like, at this level that's more interface level versus like core protocol. But you immediately get into paralysis, like standardization paralysis, if you just don't actually have a POC that like a bunch of people can align on and just like rally behind to try and to iterate from. And I think that's like the fundamental thing why this is, in my opinion, not a bad thing. And probably the best thing that we've gotten out of this group is to say, hey, we're actually just like going to continue to move forward, test and prod, and like continue to iterate and fix it, because it's an interface. It doesn't matter, right? Like that's, I think, the beauty. This isn't like a core EIP. This is at the ERC level. And And I think we actually just need to like remember that fundamentally it's fine. You know, like I've worked with so many EIPs to try and get them across. They're very challenging. The fact that we actually have a POC done makes this like infinitely better and easier for us to push forward. You know, that's what we did with multi-injector provider, right? And like it worked. It just took forever for wallets to get implemented. And this will take forever to get implemented across things. But there is like user groups that need this. New chains need this framework. Solvers need this framework for the new chains. And frankly, there's like nothing really that works right now. Like Hart said, you know, it takes time for Across and like other teams to like actually get into new chains. And so this is like fundamentally, like I think a very good step forward.
Devin?
Yeah, I'll just contribute my 2 cents in terms. I think this is cool. This is a really cool effort. Maybe like some historical background. Like, I think we've been talking about intents for like 3-4 years now. And there's a bunch of products now in the space. Everyone's sort of building around it. I think it is the right time for us to get more serious about standardization. I do think that standardization is going to have a big impact. And so anything that moves us in that direction is great. It does also feel great that there's sort of practical things being written, right? We started hosting these cake workshops and cake working group about a year ago. And I think that there was a lot of like great discussions and alignment around the concept of intents and resource locks and the benefit that it would have towards Interop that has happened over the course of the last year. And at least I'm quite excited to see that there's sort of practical code that we're starting to have conversations around and alignment, regardless of the maturity of it at this stage.
Cool. Any other feedback, comments? I would like just to, I guess, quickly emphasize that, again, like we're sort of in the, I hear Philippe on the, we missed a phase here in terms of gathering comments, RFC. But I do think we're sort of in that phase now, or the idea is to be in that phase. And for us, it's more about getting serious around standardization, maintaining momentum, and just pushing forward, showing that this as a shelling point that we can all gather around. But it still is very, very early. And I think anyone who's been involved with it to date is very open to feedback and finding the best way forward for this. So do you feel like you got some of your questions answered at least?
Yes, yeah, it makes sense. I do agree that having an implementation pushes others to contribute. I want us to be cautious around how strongly we promote something and how strongly we. Oh, sorry, was it? Am I not supposed to talk?
No, you're good. Yeah, thanks. Keep going.
Okay. I just want to. I think we should be careful how fast we push people to implement this.
Sure.
Because if we end up that people have like huge migration issues and constant breaking changes, like people just stop recommending it, right? Like you want to get it at least right to a certain degree so that that we have certain things like maintainability, upgradability, backwards compatibility, all these things. Like think a little bit about that before we get people implementing it and then they have a bad experience. And like if word of mouth doesn't work for it, we have kind of failed. Like these standards work via word of mouth, right? They find adoption because people recommend it. So we make sure that it actually is a recommendable standard. So I would love to keep the implementation as small as possible and make sure we have a huge buy-in. I think we have like the buy-in for the first push was very verbal. I would love to challenge each of the contributors, like each of the signers essentially, to which extent they are implementing intents right now or have already implemented it. Like where are they at? There are a few people that were very early with intents, right? Like Across led it. And then like we saw Mayan as a bridge following up suit. Squid followed up as well. And Lefi as an aggregator has been supporting all of those from the get-go. But then I'm wondering like on which level do we have a buy-in right now? Yeah, what are the individual needs, and can we satisfy all of them with that one standard?
Got it. Nam?
Yeah, I want to, I think, reiterate some of the like things that I guess mentioned in the chat, right? About like, I hear you, Philip, that like, right, like people should be aware of what they're getting, right? And what we should definitely not sell them is like, oh, interop is solved, right? I've never liked the term. Some people push it, right? Like clearly it's not solved. But the reason why we're all here because it's definitionally not solved. But I think also what I think sucks if you are like, right, like if you're a new chain, if you are like a new project, right, like being told like, actually hold up, wait, let us go through the RFC phase of this standard standardization effort to only then get intense. That is like, I think, right, like everybody on Twitter talks about all the time how like Ethereum is so fragmented, and basically telling them, hold up, wait for the RFC phase of the standard to get intense. That doesn't seem right either, right? And so again, I think the point here is that like, for people who want to get intense today, right? And yeah, maybe Spencer, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, right, like if you're an Orbit chain today, right, like you go out there and you go basically beg hard, hey, can you please deploy on my chain, right? And that's just like not a tenable world that we live in. Like we just need to be in a world where like people can get the drop experience that they want. And maybe, yeah, right, like in 6 months, like hard will be like everywhere and that's great. But like until then, like I think people need the ability to get intense beforehand. And this is just hopefully, I mean, again, if this is not useful, please tell me. But like, hopefully this is a useful set of tools that allow people to get intense to their chain without having to wait for permission from anybody else.
So we
Since
are
my
a bit
name was
over.
mentioned,
Oh.
Josh, I'll go for 2 seconds. Just
Yeah,
since
yeah,
my name
okay.
was mentioned,
Yeah,
just like the way I see value here, like we want intense fast everywhere. Remember, unify Ethereum. That's Josh's job here. Josh's literal job at the foundation is like, let's unify Ethereum and make it all feel like one chain again. So like, let's go, right? So intense everywhere faster is good. Right now, what I see happening is we have a framework and a process by which Arbitrum can now, you know, in their universal intense engine, they can go and point in this direction to use open standards like 7683 and then extend it in this intent framework to get intense to every Orbit chain on day one. That is awesome. Superchain can build a 7683 settlement contract that will let them get intense faster and cheaper to Superchain chains. That's awesome. AgLayer can do the same thing. Hyperlane can bring it to all these other places. This is all like great stuff. So like, it's not all solved, but like good effort. Let's go. Let's move fast. Let's do something. Let's unify Ethereum. I think it's cool. So that's my rallying cry.
Thanks, Hart. So let's go through a couple other hands that are up real quick, and then we'll maybe go to the next topic on the call, and we can schedule a different call to maybe continue this discussion. I do think it's an important point. I'm glad that Philippe and others are here raising these points. I think what would be very bad, we would all agree, is to keep going without, or to move down the wrong path here. None of us wants to move in the wrong direction. So let's make sure that we're addressing all these points and that we're kicking off the OIF in the best way possible. So maybe in for a separate call. Arjun?
Hey. So I guess one thing that I'm hearing is that it sounds like a lot of people we're sort of all in agreement that we all want intense, and that we shouldn't move too fast on the OIF approach because there might be challenges. Are there any like specific challenges that we want to point out on this call? Because we have spent 30 minutes agreeing on that first point.
Yeah, it's a good. I think what we should do is to do this async. I do want to make sure that we capture everything that's being brought up, make sure that we capture everyone's actual concerns that are real concerns, pointing to real things. But maybe let's, if that's okay with everybody here, let's do that async and probably on a separate call as well.
That works.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks all. I think that was a good first discussion. Cool. Moving on. Agenda item number 2, we just wanted to quickly touch on the GitHub repo for the L2 interop. Skelly, are you here?
Yes, got free. Yeah, so repo-wise, I wanted to also paste the PR. LeFi team has been discussing on this call. So if you guys want to give that a quick read, collaborate and comment there, that'd be awesome, just to keep the conversation going. Besides that, there are a bunch of other open PRs by us and by other teams. One of the most important ones is actually everything related to chain-specific addresses and nomenclature. So defining, because I've seen some people kind of concerned about, okay, what are intents? What are we referring to when we talk about this or that? So honestly, having a way for us to just agree on the words that we use to define concepts, that'd be awesome. Besides that, anything that we can point to inside that repo, for example, current efforts, or any, as Philips was referring, like any specific implementations for people using the open intent frameworks or other standards, that'd be great as well. So mainly this is a call for collaboration and for people to start. I know if there is anyone here that feels like very strongly about, hey, I want to kind of put more effort or like specifically, I don't know, set aside some hours to work on this repo, either ping Josh or me or anybody else at Wonderland and let us know. We'll love to have you and have more people kind of, yeah, putting some love on that repo.
Thanks, Kelly. Cool. If no questions, next up we have a presentation demo from LayerSwap on their intents with atomic swaps.
Hey guys, hello. Can I share my screen? Yeah. Kind of interesting that you had all this discussion before this presentation, so I will try to keep it as quick as possible, but I'm founder of LayerSwap. We've been operating a bridging solution for around 2-3 years now. And right now we designed a protocol that addresses like 2 main points. The first thing is that we designed a protocol that is completely trustless. So you can bridge assets in a trustless manner. And the second important point is, as you already mentioned, is that new networks having really hard time to get onboarded into any bridging protocol at all. Usually they get just onboarded into like centralized bridging protocols like LayerSwap and etc. So we want to fix that. So we want to fix these 2 major problems. We want to be bridging trustless and we want to be permissionless for any network. So how is basically a combination of different advancement in our space, like it intends atomic swaps, improved version of atomic swaps, and light clients like Helios that you can run a light client inside the browser for EVM chains. So let me walk you through like how it works from technical side, and then I will show you a demo live in production. So let's say what happens when Alice wants to transfer 1 Ethereum from Starknet to Optimism. So I will assume that there is already a familiarity with standard version of atomic swaps. So I will just introduce the one that we modified it. So what happens now is Alice discovered all solvers who are ready for solving this route, like from Starknet to Optimism. Once she discovered this, she logs her funds in Starknet network in pre-HTLC contract. She logs 1 Ethereum with time lock. So at this stage, the funds are locked. Nothing can happen with these funds. Only funds can be unlocked when time lock expired, nothing else. So then our auction starts and solvers start like it's off-chain auction, whatever happens, like someone wins this action, and let's say it's a Bob, right? Bob wins the action, and what he does is he actually does the HTLC things. So he generates a secret and calculates the hash lock based on the secret and locks 1 Ethereum in Optimism pre-HTLC contract now with hash lock and time lock. So time locks work the same. So once time lock expires, Bob can unlock the funds. But the hash lock is the new condition where if someone releases the secret, so in this lock, the funds will go to Alice. So it's embedded in the contract. So what happens right now is Alice sitting in a dApp in a bridging UI, and Alice observed this transaction in Optimism network. She sees that there is a transaction for her with specific hash lock that solver is already put the funds, everything is fine, so all it wants to complete the transaction. So now how she observes this transaction, right? So she gets this from a regular RPC endpoint, right? So that's not secure because for example, the RPC provider can provide you a wrong data, or RPC provider can be running a solver for their own, so they can collude and give you some wrong cache lock. So for this, you run a light client inside your browser with Helios, so you verify that, for example, for Optimist, you basically have a verification of pre-confirmations, which is more than enough to be sure that the RPC provider is not lying to you. So once Alice verifies this, she verifies it and adds this hash lock in her original commitment. So right now, her original lock is with the same condition. So we have pre-hash TLC contract in Starknet in Optimism with same hash lock. So right now, what Solver does is he just went and released the secret in source and destination network, and the exchange is done. So exchange is completely done in a trustless manner. So in none of the stages, funds were taken into custody for neither of side. So the last thing that I just want to mention before demo. So this protocol is completely permissionless. What I mean is, it means what it takes for a new network to join this protocol. It just means to deploy a pre-HTLC contract in this new network and run a solver. So that's it. So no gatekeepers at all. So let me quickly do a demo right now as we are running on time. Let's see. Let's go from Arbitrum to Optimism. Do I have funds? Yes. And you will see here that basically, yeah. So basically, a user has to do 2 steps right now. So right now, I am confirming the initial transaction. So my transaction is committed with the time lock. And right now, the solver is locking the funds for me. Okay, so solver locked the funds. So you can see the transaction is verified by Lightning. It's because we run Helios for Optimism. So this is the locked transaction done by the solver. So what I have to do is right now, I just have to confirm. It just confirmed that this is the hash lock I want to use. Once I confirm this hash lock, this actually sends the transaction to a relayer, which published to the network. And right now, in few seconds, my trustless asset exchange will be completed. And yeah, and that's basically it. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have. Let's see this finished. So then. Yeah, and also you can see that basically the UX, for example, compared to a cross or any other protocol is definitely bad. It takes more time. It takes like two steps. But the our idea is that we wanted to this be completely trustless, completely permissionless, then figure out the UX. So that was basically the main idea. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So let me know if there are any questions.
Thanks, Arun. Any questions?
As always, all demos do not work, right?
Cool. Maybe we can check back on this. Let's keep going. Yeah. We're short on time. Next up, Aztec RFP for cross-chain interop.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen, but very quickly, if you do not know what Aztec is a privacy preserving layer 2. We're going to be launching fully decentralized with permissionless sequencers and provers. But less known fact about Aztec is we have both private execution and also public execution. So you get to have atomic communication between the private domains and public domains, not just a privacy chain. As of today, we have like Sandbox, which is a local tool similar to Anvil that runs locally on your machine. And next up is our decentralized testnet, which will happen in a couple of months, definitely in this quarter. And I'm Rahul. I'm a senior product manager at Aztec. I lead our testnet efforts and also our cross-chain work. So I mentioned we are about to launch our testnet. Why are we investing so much in Interop already? Isn't it a bit early? And my thinking here is every L2 here has brought significant UX improvements, but in their own siloed ecosystems. Like even within their own stack, sometimes those UX improvements shatter. We think if Aztec sort of runs with the same playbook of creating an isolated privacy chain, an isolated ecosystem with our own apps, we kind of sort of have failed. In my head, like a true L2 is something that should help and compose on like the rest of the other L2s instead of creating our own sort of siloed ecosystem. So what we really want to do is not just build our own privacy chain and stay in our own infinite garden, but rather bring privacy to all of Ethereum. And I sort of started thinking, what's the easiest way to bring privacy to existing L2s, to existing apps in these L2s? And the bridge was how I came up with the solution. Imagine if like every L2 and most apps have been asking for privacy. This is actually something that Web 2 does better than Web 3. And Interop and privacy are two of the last sort of products that users have always asked for that do not really exist. Instead of having each app, and the reason they don't exist is like, especially for privacy, like if you want to have each app build their own privacy set, it's a huge technical and compliance hurdle. And there's so much stuff that you need to figure out. Instead, you can just use Aztec. And this helps with all of the interop efforts that we need to do for Ethereum, because like Aztec has this global privacy set, which can have all of Ethereum built on top of it. But what would you actually do with this? Like, why is this bridge actually helpful for the other apps? Imagine doing like some kind of ZK proof of passport to gate all of my DeFi interactions on Arbitrum, right? This is actually something that institutional DeFi would require. They want to have some kind of an idea of all of the liquidity providers and users. Or imagine if you could sort of control all the assets on another chain using a private multisig on Aztec. You could have like, for example, a Face ID or like multiple different authentication schemes using whatever account abstraction scheme you have on Aztec, and then use this message passing bridge to gatekeep whatever interactions you want on Optimism, Arbitrum base, whatever have you. You could also do like ZKML or ZK variants of compliance or regulatory requirements that you want, like privacy pools, rate limiting, viewing keys, whatever you want, for any interactions you do on all of the existing L2s. So you could have something really cool, like you would privately sort of deposit into, let's say, Aave on Arbitrum, and then bridge all of the proceeds, all the A tokens, so to speak, back into Aztec. And you could use some of these new EIP 7702 or 4337 to automate this, such that the user, in some cases, may not even need an Ethereum wallet, per se. Now, all of this detail is already on this doc that I've shared. If you read through this RFP, you'll see like an additional doc that goes into the weeds with everything that I've spoken about, some of these flows, like what you need to know about Aztec, because Aztec's not really EVM compatible to allow for this sort of Turing complete private public execution environment. One thing you'll notice though is I have intentionally not spoken about what EIP to follow, what sort of, do you want resource lock-ins, do you want 7802 or whatever ERCs, EIPs everyone cares for. And that's because we're kind of early. If you think like 7755 is the right way, try and build it. I know Base is already creating a bunch of POCs where they've connected 7755 with like Solana and a bunch of other L2s. If you think 7683 the right way, let's try to build a private compatible version of this. It actually helps test your hypothesis if your EIP is actually like VM agnostic. Like, can it all actually hand all the other unique VMs that L2s bring, like Starknet or Fuel, or selfishly Aztec, of course. It kind of tests how rigorous all of the work that DeFi Online has to do for the L2 interop as well. I don't want to take up too much time, but here's what I'll say. Like, for me, this is like a personal urge to sort of think about the user, and instead of building like yet another chain abstraction solution or yet another bridge that has basically similar offerings as everything else out there from the user point of view, and instead created something a bit more differentiated that optionally adds this layer of privacy. So like all of Ethereum can benefit from whatever other L2s are doing. It's also never been a better time to build privacy software, thanks to various regimes and stuff. So really there is like, it has actually just never been better. Like Josh has done such a good job of coordinating all of this with each other. We can just build on top of it in a much more exponential fashion than we've done before. So what does this mean for everyone here? If this is of interest to you, you can feel free to read this. You can either set up a proposal. This is really a request for proposals on people who want to build cross-chain apps. Feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can tweet about this. You can tell your friends or whoever is looking for like building a much more differentiated bridging solution or chain abstraction solution. I'll drop some links in the Zoom chat for people who want to follow this along. But that's it from my side. I'm open to any questions. I've left my contact, Telegram, Twitter, or X rather, and this RFP. I'd love to see, I'd be happy to answer any questions along this note.
Perfect. Maybe just time for one question so we can get to the last topic here, but yes, Orest.
Hey, just one quick question, just in case I missed it. When you say privacy, this is all due to ZK, and so it comes with the limitation that we can't share such state, correct? Like the private elements are all only visible to one user and can't interact with another. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is ZK. So private shared state is not really possible, but you interact. That's why you also have a public side, like all the public L2s. So you can still hide your identity, basically. You could also go a bit extra and obfuscate the exact interactions you want to do. Like you could batch a bunch of swaps to hide individual swaps. And then there are more complex things that I'll not bore everyone else we are with, but I'm happy to talk about it async.
Awesome. Thanks. Cool. Then moving on, last up, the broadcaster ERC from Arbitrum. Henry, are you available? Perfect.
Yep, I'm here. I assume everyone can see my screen here.
Yep.
But
thanks.
let me just put this into slideshow. So my name is Henry. Chris and I are smart contract developers at Off-Chain Labs, and we've written this cross-chain broadcaster standard. Don't have a ERC number yet, but I'm hoping we can get into a little bit about how it works and what it does and why we made it. So this ERC defines a standardized protocol for trustless cross-rollup message passing with storage proofs. So it allows contracts to broadcast and receive messages across upgradable heterogeneous rollup stacks through a simple unified API. And by broadcast, I mean that, when a dApp sends a message, it can be read and received by all chains, granted they share a common ancestor. So getting into some of the core components of the spec, we have these two contracts, the broadcaster and receiver contracts. There will be one of each of these on every chain, and they are the contracts that dApps directly interface with to send and receive messages amongst each other and across chains. So broadcaster is super simple. It just takes in messages and puts them in its own storage. And then the receiver contract, we'll get into a little bit about how it works later, but basically it can process a series of storage proofs to read the storage of broadcasters on other chains and thereby receive messages. So we think one of the main innovations of this standard are these provers and pointers. And so basically these block hash prover contracts contain and execute logic to obtain a target block hash given a home block hash. So in this picture, we've got L to M. You can take a chain L block hash and get a chain M block hash through verifying a storage proof, assuming the chain M block hash exists in chain L's storage, if that makes sense. So this is what allows us to support heterogeneous rollup stacks because they each have different locations for where they're storing block hashes on parent and child chains and so on. So we have contracts that define procedures for each of these chains. And we also have these pointer contracts, which basically reference the most up-to-date version of the block hash prover for a given chain. And that's what allows this system to handle the fact that rollups can upgrade their contracts, move storage slots around, and so on. So each chain, like taking Arbitrum 1 as an example, will have two of these provers and pointers. They'll have one whose home is taking Arbitrum 1. There will be one whose home is L1 and target is Arbitrum 1, and one whose home is Arbitrum 1 and target is L1. So you can go, you've linked Arbitrum 1 to Ethereum in both directions. And so if you take a bunch of these pointers and string them together, you can, you've made what's called a route. And a route is a list of these pointer contracts that define how to obtain the block hash of a remote chain from a local chain. And so this is what allows us to traverse multiple chains to get to another. So like in this picture, we've got chain L and chain P are both L2s. Chain M is mainnet Ethereum. And then chain R is an L3 on top of chain P. And by stringing these pointers together, we can go from a chain L block hash to a chain M block hash to a chain P block hash, and finally to a chain R block hash, which then we can use to read the broadcaster's storage. Okay, so, putting all this together, here's what it looks like in one picture. You've got this broadcaster on chain R, and you want to read one of its messages on chain L. You have a DApp calling into the receiver, passing some storage proofs and a route of pointers A, B, C. And then the receiver calls into these block hash prover contracts to iteratively execute this procedure to get the block hash of this remote chain, to then verify a storage proof against that to get a message. So that's kind of the gist about how the cross-chain broadcaster works, how it enables a simple API, how it deals with upgradability, and how it can unify heterogeneous rollup stacks into a sort of unified system that's easy for developers. So if you want to learn more about it or discuss it, we have a post on ETH Magicians. We have a repo where we have a reference implementation, and as well as the standards text. And we have also a blog post about it and an FAQ about it. I don't know if I have time for questions, probably not, but if we do, I'm happy to take some. If not, then we can move on.
Thanks, Henry. Any quick questions?
Yeah, first, just a simple question. Why is it an ERC rather than RIP? If I understand correctly, each of the rollups actually has to deploy the contract in order to point to the correct slot for its route. So wouldn't it make sense to make this an RIP?
I mean, we're open to making it an RIP, and yes, you're correct that each rollup would have to deploy and maintain these pointer things. Yeah, I mean, we're open to making it in RRC or RIP if that ends up making more sense.
No, I think it seems like a classic case for an RIP, but it doesn't matter as much. Just wondered. And another question about finality. I mean, do you take into account reorgs of various layer 2s or finality or a long finality time, such as waiting for a fraud proof?
Yeah, so these provers should only get finalized block hashes. So, if you're getting an L1 block hash from an L2 block hash, it should be a finalized L1 block hash.
Mhm.
And if you're going the other way, it should be an L2 block
Yeah.
hash, like passed through the entire fraud-proof period and been confirmed and finalized on L1.
Mhm. Yeah, so latency would still be latency would still be 7 days in the case of optimistic rollup, like using the canonical bridge.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Sure.
Oris?
And how do you guys generate the storage proofs? You mentioned you have a code implementation already.
Yeah, we don't have an implementation of like the off-chain bits that would be generating these proofs. We just have a reference implementation of the contracts. But we think that there will probably be, like OP-Stack and Nitro will have like their own implementations of this thing that'll be deployed in a lot of different places. So whatever off-chain code is going to need to understand like how to build storage proofs that are compatible with those specific prover implementations.
Gotcha.
Yeah. By the way, one interesting thing about this about rollups implementing this is that it also serves as a light client contract, right? So, like, I mean, you'd be able to make view calls into it in order to prove the state of to prove the state if an RPC gives you such a proof, right? So, I mean, you could technically use it as a light client.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So that's I'm really glad about this, because that's actually one of the things that we're hoping to standardize in the future, so that as part of the on-chain config for every rollup, you would have a light client contract with a standardized ABI, so that wallets that use a chain they're unfamiliar with can still verify its state. So I think this ERC or RIP could be extended to become also the light client standard.
We are a bit over time. Want to get to Frangio real quick?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No worries.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to ask Henry, would you consider changing the interface of the receiver to be less tied to the fact that it uses these routes and storage proofs? And that is so that, like Ellie says, some other protocol that is able to implement broadcasts in a different way is able to use the same interface. And yeah, would you consider doing that?
I mean, I think that, if there were multiple broadcast protocols that had different interfaces, like the routes and storage proofs are pretty core to how this thing works, so I don't think they can really be removed. But maybe there can be like some higher level contract that sort of acts as like a middleman thing. Could make sense. I do think it could be investigated though. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying you remove the routes, just you would just make the types of the function less specific to what it's doing. So just use bytes, like instead of the struct, and in that way some other protocol could reuse that.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean, potentially if like that's what people would find more useful, then yeah, I don't see any specific reason why not.
Okay, yeah, that would be nice to hear if anyone else would be interested in implementing this, and then that would be one data point.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think we got through everything. Sorry, we're a little bit over. Also, a reminder that we will be streaming some of the discussions and talks happening in Denver. I will drop a link in the Telegram group, and we will continue this discussion maybe even later this week. The two takeaways that I just dropped in the chat, I think we do for sure need more time to go through the OIF, address feedback, all of that kind of good stuff. And then also, yeah, there was some good discussion in the chat around cross-chain token standardization. I think that is certainly something that could use more attention as well. So anything else, please drop a message in the chat, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you.
Bye bye, guys.
You. Bye.